The wagon came down the lake road before the mud had properly set, which meant whoever was driving didn't know the road or didn't care about it. She heard the wheels before she saw them. That particular creak of weight on soft ground, a sound that carried differently in April than it did in any other month, when the birch trees had just started their first hesitant green and the frost was still making up its mind about leaving. She was in the lean-to when it came. She had been lacing a snowshoe frame, the kind of work that asked nothing from her eyes once she knew the pattern, and she'd known it since she was 12. She did not stop when the wheels came into the yard. She finished the row. She bit the knot. Only then did she step out into the light. The man who climbed down was heavy through the chest, dressed in a coat from a tailor in town, not a rack at the general store. He carried a document case with a brass clasp under his arm. She had seen that kind of case exactly twice in her life. Neither time had it held anything she was glad to read. "Morning," he said. She did not answer that. Behind her, inside the doorway, a boot scraped on the floorboard. The boy was awake then and listening. His hand came around the door frame. Small fingers curled against the wood, not quite showing himself, not quite hiding either. The habit of a child who had learned that being visible too early put you at a disadvantage. "I've come for the boy," the man said. He said it the way a person reads from a prepared statement, clean, practiced without inflection. "He's my brother's son, blood. He belongs with family on the farm, not." He looked at the lean-to, the snowshoe frame still hanging from its peg, the yard with its woodpile and its rope lines. "Not here." She looked at the document case. She did not move toward it. "I have a letter," she said. He blinked at that. The blink of a man who had expected the door to open before he finished knocking. "A letter in his hand before he died," she said, "naming me the boy's guardian, not his minder, not his seasonal arrangement, his guardian." The words sat between them. The man's jaw moved once, as though he were testing something against his back teeth. "Whatever he wrote doesn't supersede a family claim. I've spoken to a solicitor in Kenora. I have documents." "So do I," she said. "Chickadee," called from the birch line. The wagon horse shook its head against the first flies of the season. She kept her eyes on the man in her yard and thought of an October evening when a different man had stood at her door with ice still in his beard from the ride out and asked her for something no person had any right to ask a stranger. She had said yes before she'd thought it through. She was still thinking it through. She thought it through every day. "He stays," she said. The man looked at her the way men looked at women when they were recalculating. The document case stayed under his arm, unopened. It would stay that way. 3 weeks before the wagon came up the road, the lake ice had gone out with a sound like far-off artillery, and she had stood at the window listening to it, the way she always did. That particular violence of winter, losing its grip on something it had held for 5 months. The boy had been at the window beside her, not pressed against the glass the way she might have expected a child to do, but standing at a small distance from it, watching the far shore. "Does it do that every year?" he asked. "Every year I've been here." He considered this. How many years? 7. He nodded, as if 7 were a number with weight to it. He was 8 years old, or near enough. He had been with her since October. She had stopped counting the weeks somewhere around February and had begun counting other things instead. How many times, he asked, before helping himself to the bread without being told. How much farther apart his stitches were getting compared to when she'd first handed him the awl. She had not expected to count those things. She had not expected much of anything to do with him when it came down to it. The letter from Dr. Warwick's courier had arrived with the first thaw. She had read it standing in the yard with the mud cold under her boots, the sun too bright for March after all those dark months. It was not long. The doctor was not a man who used length to soften what he had to say. He passed the 14th in the evening. Quietly, which is more than he expected. "The document I have been holding is yours now," as he requested. "I will bring it when the road allows. There are matters it would be well for you to understand before others come asking questions you haven't prepared for." She had folded it back along its crease and put it in her coat pocket and stood there a while longer, the meltwater running in the ruts of the lane. The boy's voice coming from the barn where he was talking to the dog about something she couldn't make out. She had known since December that there would be no spring visit from the man who had brought the boy to her door. She had known it the way she knew other things over the winter. Not from being told, but from paying attention to what was not said as much as what was. Dr. Warwick came himself when the road finally allowed it, on a gray mare with mud up to her hocks. He had a document in his coat and the look of a person delivering a weight they were glad to hand off. He had his reasons for doing it this way, the doctor said. He stood in her kitchen with his hat on, the way he did when he meant to stay only as long as the thing required, for not telling you at the start. So the boy wouldn't be a burden before he was a responsibility, she said. Dr. Warwick looked at her. That's more or less what he told me. She read the letter at the kitchen table, with the doctor standing by the door and the boy outside splitting kindling with more enthusiasm than precision. It was written in a hand that started firm and went thin near the end the way a candle burns. He had dated it the second week of December. He had written her name at the top, not her position, not her trade, not the woman who agreed to keep him, but her actual name, written out in full, the way a man writes something he wants to be unmistakable. Guardian was the word he used. He had written it twice, which she understood to mean he had meant it to survive argument. Does anyone else know what's in this? She asked. His brother will know there's a letter. I sent word of the death. I said nothing about the contents. He'll come, she said. Yes, Dr. Warwick said, I expect he will. She set the letter down on the table and looked out the window at the boy, who had abandoned the kindling and was attempting to balance on the top rail of the fence post with his arms out, the dog watching from below with the professional interest of a creature that knew falling was likely. Good, she said, then I'll be ready. It had been the coldest February she could remember in 7 years on that lake, the kind of cold that cracked fence rails in the night and turned the inside of windows to white fur. She had banked the stove higher than usual and not felt foolish about it. The boy had a cough that came and went. Nothing the doctor worried over when she wrote him, just the kind of cough that lived in northern winters and left in spring like a guest who had finally got the message. She had watched it the way she watched the woodpile, counting, calculating, measuring against how much winter was left. The third week of February, she woke to a sound she could not place for a moment. Not the stove, not the wind at the north wall, which she knew like a voice by now. Something smaller. She was across the kitchen before she had decided to be. He was sitting up on the cot with the quilt at his waist, his hands pressed flat on his own knees. His eyes were open and fixed on the wall as though he were listening for something inside it. Bad dream, she said. He shook his head, just thinking. She sat on the edge of the cot. The floor popped once in the cold. Outside something, a branch, a post, made that sharp crack that deep winter made when it was serious about itself. Papa's hands looked like yours, the boy said. She was still. When he worked on things, the boy said, he had a way of holding whatever it was, like it might say something back if he was patient enough. He looked down at his own hands, which were small and chapped and had been since October. He fixed everything himself. He never threw anything out. She thought of the first night, unpacking the canvas bag the man had left. A change of clothes, a tin cup, a carved wooden bird with one wing repaired so many times the repair had become part of the wing. A pair of woolen socks darned so carefully they were more darn than sock. She had held each thing up in the lamplight, this careful inventory of what a man thought his son would need. And she had understood then, in a way she hadn't let herself before that moment, what it meant that he had packed it himself. He sounds like a careful man, she said. He was. The boy looked up at her. He was real careful with things that mattered to him. She reached over and drew the quilt back up over his shoulders, the same way she folded a lace when she finished a row, without thinking about it, just doing the thing the right way. Lie down, she said. The cold gets in when you sit up. He lay down. She did not leave right away. She sat on the edge of the cot until his breathing evened and his hands went loose from the quilt's edge. And she could hear in his stillness that he was genuinely asleep and not just pretending, which were two very different things in a child, and she had learned to tell them apart somewhere around December. Then she went and banked the stove, though it did not need it, and lay awake a long time thinking about a man who fixed things carefully and never threw anything out, and what it must have cost him to sit across from a stranger and ask her to keep what mattered most to him. There had been a Sunday in January, the church at Malachi's Crossing, which she attended more for the walk than the sermon, which she found reliable in its length if nothing else. The boy had stood beside her in the pew and sung the hymns in the same earnest, tone-deaf way he did most things, and she had not told him to sing quieter. After, in the hall, while the tea was poured, and the winter's gossip moved through the room in the good-natured and slightly sharp way of communities that had spent 3 months looking at the same faces, a woman near the door, wide-shouldered, confident in her opinions, coat with a fur collar that was never quite as warm as it looked, set down her cup and said it loud enough for the room. "That Calloway boy?" She said it like a question it wasn't. She was cutting the marble cake and did not stop. "Been with you since the fall, hasn't he?" The woman waited. "His father get himself sorted out then?" "He's staying with me a while," she said. "How long's a while?" "A beat, and then, word was it was just the season. Roads have been clear for weeks." "Roads change," she said. She handed the first slice to the minister's wife, who took it with the gratitude of someone glad to have something to hold. And she did not look up at the woman by the door, or at the room that had stopped talking in that particular way of rooms that are still very much listening. She cut the next slice. The boy was by the window with 2 of the Paxton children, demonstrating something with a piece of string that was making one of them laugh. The woman did not ask again. Rooms like that tended not to push past the first silence if the silence was solid enough. Walking home, the road was packed hard and clear. The boy walked beside her with his hands in his pockets and his breath coming out in clouds. "You could have just said he's not coming back," the boy said. He said it flat, without accusation. The way he said most things now, more directly than she had expected in October from a child who'd said barely 10 words in his first 2 weeks. She was quiet for a moment. "I could have," she said. "Why didn't you?" The birch trees along the road held the last of the light in their crowns. Behind them, the lake ice caught the sun in the flat way it did before the afternoon went cold again. "Because it's not their news to have yet," she said. "It's yours first." He thought about that. They walked far enough that the voices from the church hall had gone completely quiet behind them. "Do you think he knew?" the boy said. "That he wasn't coming back in spring?" She thought of a man on her doorstep in October, one hand pressed against his side when he thought she wasn't watching. "Yes," she said, "I think he knew." The boy's chin dipped once. He was the kind of child who absorbed things before responding to them. Not slow, not avoidant, just careful with what he received. She recognized it. It was his father's habit, she supposed. "Then he picked you on purpose," the boy said. He did. He didn't say anything else. He slipped his hand into hers without asking, the way he had started doing somewhere around December, without either of them remarking on it. And they walked the rest of the way home, with the wind low and the sky going dark at the edges and the road empty all the way to the gate. Earlier in the winter, the first week of December, when the lake had fully frozen and the snow had stopped being new and become simply the condition of everything, she had come in from the barn to find the boy at the kitchen table with a broken harness buckle and a look of furious concentration. He had found it in the lean-to, where she kept the work waiting to be done. "It won't go back," he said, without looking up. The tongue of the buckle had bent past the point it should have gone, past the point metal wanted to remember correctly. She hung her coat on the peg. She looked at the buckle. She could have taken it from him, and had it right in 3 minutes. She knew exactly what it needed. Instead, she pulled the other chair out, sat across from him, and pushed the tin of small tools toward him. The needle-nosed pliers, the brass tapping block, the awl. She said, "What do you think it needs?" He looked up at her. "I don't know how." "Nobody does the first time." He picked up the pliers. He looked at the buckle. He set the pliers down, picked them up again, looked at the angle differently, tried again. His first attempt made it worse. She did not take it from him. She watched his face move through all the stages. Frustration, the verge of quitting, the recalculation, and she said nothing, because there was a moment in the middle of that sequence when silence was the most useful thing a person could offer, and interrupting before it arrived only robbed the other person of something they had to find on their own. He got it on the fourth try. Not perfect, the tongue would always sit a fraction high, the metal had a small mark from the wrong approach, but functional, it would hold, it would do the work. He held it up. "It's crooked," he said. "It'll hold," she said. "That's what matters in a buckle." He set it down and looked at it for a moment, and then at her, with an expression she didn't quite have a name for. Something between satisfaction and the private discovery of a thing he had not known about himself before that moment. She pushed the tin toward him. "There's a cinch ring that needs the same treatment," she said. "Left side of the tin." He found it without being shown which one. She had not restitched the buckle that night. She had not restitched it the next morning either, when the boy went out to the barn with it in his coat pocket, running his thumb over the place where he had straightened what had been bent wrong, the crooked correction holding exactly as promised. Sound, if not elegant. He had carried it for a week before setting it on the shelf in the lean-to with the other pieces she had let him try his hand at. And every time she passed it, she saw the slight imperfection in the tongue and did not correct it, the way she did not correct the stitching on the first mitten he had knitted in February. Uneven across the cuff, but warm and holding, which was the whole point of a mitten. Before that December, before the buckle and the letter and the February night, there was an October evening when she had been splitting wood in the last of the light and heard a horse on the road that did not sound right. Too slow for the pace, too deliberate, each step considered. She set the axe down. The man who came through the gate was leading the horse rather than riding it. He was broad through the shoulders, but moving like a man who was spending more effort than the walk should have cost him. He had a boy with him, the child sitting back on the horse with a canvas bag across his lap, his eyes taking in the yard the way a child's eyes did when they had learned to evaluate new places quickly and quietly. The man stopped at the edge of the yard. He did not come further, as if there were a line he was asking permission to cross. "I've heard you take in repair work," he said. "Hurtis tack, leather goods." "I do." "I heard you're good at it." She waited. He took his hat off. He looked at the hat for a moment and not at her, and she watched his chest move with a breath he was managing carefully. He had a handkerchief in the same hand as the hat, and when he brought it briefly to his mouth, she saw the mark on the cloth before he folded it away. "I have a boy," he said, 8 years old. His mother's been gone 4 years. He stopped, he started again. "I'd someone to keep him, maybe through the winter, maybe past it." He did not explain what maybe past it meant. He did not need to. She had understood, in that moment, more than he'd said. The way she understood most things, not from information given directly, but from paying attention to what the information was arranged around. "Can he eat what I eat?" she said. The man looked up at that. Something moved across his face quickly, the way a door moves in a draft. "Yes," he said. "Can he work?" "He's not afraid of it." She looked at the boy on the horse, who was looking back at her with a steady, careful attention that reminded her of something she couldn't name immediately, and then could. The way good animals looked at you when they were deciding whether you were worth trusting. Not hostile, not afraid, just measuring. "Bring him inside," she said. "There's stew on." She did not say yes in so many words. She went inside, and the man brought the boy in after her, and the boy sat at her kitchen table with the canvas bag on his lap. And the man did not stay long, not nearly long enough for it to look like anything other than what it was. He said he'd be back by spring. He said it. The way people said things they needed to believe were true. At the door, he stopped with his hat in both hands, and he looked at the boy, who was eating the stew with the focus of someone who had been hungrier than he was letting on. "He likes things to make sense," the man said quietly, just to her, not to the boy. If you tell him the reason for a thing, he'll do it without argument. He just needs the reason. She nodded. He put his hat on, he went. She did not watch him go the way she had watched others go. She went back to the stove and ladled more stew into the bowl of a boy she did not know. And she did not think about what she'd agreed to until later, much later, when he was asleep and she was sitting at the table in the dark, trying to account for what she'd done and finding she couldn't, not in any terms that would have satisfied a reasonable person. She only knew that she had looked at a man managing a careful breath and holding a marked handkerchief, and then she had looked at the child on the horse measuring her, and something in her had made its decision before she had been consulted about it. She had gone to bed that night without understanding it. She understood it now. She was in the lean-to when the man with the document case finally left. She heard the wagon turn in the yard, heard the horse pick up its pace on the road out, heard the sound of wheels diminish and then disappear behind the tree line. She finished the lace row she had been working on. She bit the knot. She set the frame down. The boy was in the doorway. He had his father's canvas bag over one shoulder, the way he'd carried it the night he arrived, as though the weight of it was familiar, something he'd learned to balance long before he'd come here. The carved wooden bird was in his other hand, the one with the repaired wing, his thumb moving over the place where old wood met new the way a person moves over something memorized without meaning to. "He gone," the boy said. "He's gone." The boy was quiet a moment. The sun was fully up now, the kind of spring light that came off the snow and the open water at the same time, and made everything too bright to look at directly. Down at the lake, a pair of loons had come back in the night. She had heard them at dusk, that long, wavering call that meant the water was open and the season had finally made up its mind. "He'll come back," the boy said, not worried, not a question, just accounting for it. "Maybe," she said. "If he does, we'll deal with it." He looked at her, the way he'd looked at her that first night across the kitchen table, measuring, deciding. Then something settled in his face, and he set the canvas bag down inside the lean-to door and put the carved bird carefully on the shelf where he'd taken to keeping it, alongside the repaired buckle and the cinch ring and the other pieces she had let him try his hand at over the course of the winter. "You need more laces cut?" he asked. She looked at the snowshoe frame, 2 more. He picked up the draw knife without being shown where it was. He had known where it was since November. She sat back down with the frame in her lap, and the two of them worked without talking, the lean-to smelling of wood shavings and leather oil, and the particular clean cold of spring air coming off the water. Somewhere down the road, the wagon wheels had gone completely silent. In the birch trees along the shore, the birds were doing what birds did when the ice went out, making more noise than the situation strictly required, as though they had to announce it to be certain it was real. She pulled the lace through, knotted it, tested the tension with her thumb. It held. She did not reach for the second frame right away. She sat a moment with the finished one across her knees, and the light coming in sideways through the gap in the lean-to boards, catching the boy's hair where he worked with his head bent, the draw knife moving in careful, patient strokes that she had watched him learn over the course of a winter she had not expected to share with anyone. His father's strokes, she thought, careful with things that mattered. She picked up the second frame, found her place, and kept on.